A homeless man died alone in a freezing London warehouse in January 1943, his body found next to a half-eaten tin of rat poison. 4 months later, that same corpse fooled Adolf Hitler, redirected 90,000 German troops, and saved thousands of Allied lives. He was the most powerless person imaginable. No home. No future. No identity. Society's invisible man. But in death, he became the most powerful weapon of World War II. This is the true story of Operation Mincemeat, the most audacious, macabre, and brilliant military deception in history. It's a story where the dead spoke louder than the living, where a lie became the truth, and where 2 British intelligence officers realized something the Nazis never could, that the perfect spy is one who can't talk, can't be tortured, and can't betray you. Because the perfect spy is already dead. But let's rewind. Because to understand how a corpse became a weapon, you need to understand the impossible problem the Allies were facing in early 1943. By then, Britain had been at war for 3.5 years. The Blitz had flattened London. The Battle of the Atlantic was bleeding the Royal Navy dry. Nazi Germany controlled most of Europe. From France to Poland. From Norway to Greece. Hitler's empire stretched from the Arctic to North Africa. And the Allies had a problem. A big one. Roosevelt and Churchill had just met in Casablanca and made a decision that could win the war, or lose it. They would invade Europe. Not through France. That was suicide in 1943. But through what Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe. The target, Sicily. The largest island in the Mediterranean. The gateway to Italy. The first step to cracking Hitler's fortress. There was just one problem. Sicily was the most obvious target in the world. The Germans knew it. The Italians knew it. Hell, even neutral Spain knew it. Churchill himself admitted, everyone but a bloody fool would know it's Sicily. And that meant the Germans would be ready. Reinforcements. Artillery. Minefields. Panzer divisions waiting on the beaches. Allied intelligence estimated that if the Germans knew the invasion was coming to Sicily, and they did, the casualties would be catastrophic. Tens of thousands of young men would die in the surf before they even reached the sand. So British intelligence asked a question that sounded insane. How do you hide the most obvious invasion in the world? The answer came from 2 men you've never heard of, working in a cramped basement office in Whitehall. Ewan Montague, a Cambridge-educated lawyer-turned-naval intelligence officer, and Flight Lieutenant Charles Chumley, an eccentric RAF officer with a mind for the bizarre. And their idea was so dark, so audacious, and so utterly insane, that it involved stealing a corpse. Not just any corpse. It had to be the right corpse. The right age. The right build. Dead from the right cause. Because they were going to dress that corpse in a Royal Marines uniform, chain a briefcase full of fake invasion plans to his wrist, and dump him into the ocean off the coast of Spain. The Spanish would find the body. They'd find the briefcase. And because Spain was technically neutral but secretly friendly with the Nazis, they'd hand everything over to German intelligence, who would hand it to Hitler. And Hitler would believe it. Because why would the British go to such lengths to fake a dead man's identity unless the documents were real? The bigger the lie, the more believable it becomes. It was brilliant. It was horrifying. And it just might work. But first, they needed a body. Let's talk about why Sicily was a death trap. Sicily isn't just an island. It's a natural fortress. Mountainous terrain. Rocky coastlines. Limited landing beaches. And by early 1943, it was bristling with Italian coastal guns and German reinforcements. Over 160,000 Axis troops were stationed in Sicily and southern Italy, with more ready to pour in if needed. German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of Hitler's best commanders, was in charge of Mediterranean defenses. He had eyes everywhere. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights. Radar stations. Spy networks in North Africa. And here's the thing, you can't hide an invasion force. The Allies were staging in North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt. Hundreds of thousands of men. Thousands of ships. Mountains of supplies. German reconnaissance planes photographed it all. They knew something big was coming. The only question was, where? Sardinia? Possible, but too far from Allied air cover. Southern France? Too heavily defended. Greece? Too far east, supply lines would be a nightmare. That left Sicily. Sicily was the logical choice. Only 90 miles from Tunisia, easy supply lines. Close enough for Allied air support. And it controlled the Strait of Messina, the gateway to mainland Italy. Take Sicily, and you threaten Italy itself. Threaten Italy, and you might knock Mussolini out of the war. So in January 1943, at the Casablanca Conference, Roosevelt and Churchill made it official. Operation Husky. The invasion of Sicily. Scheduled for July. But the moment the decision was made, the planners saw the nightmare unfolding. If the Germans knew, and they would know, they'd concentrate their forces at the obvious landing beaches. Allied troops would be slaughtered in the water before they ever reached the beach. Landing craft blown apart by artillery. Machine gun fire from elevated positions. These weren't just numbers on a chart. These were 18-year-olds from Kansas and Manchester and Toronto. Kids who'd never seen combat. British intelligence projections were grim. If the Germans reinforced Sicily in time, Allied casualties could exceed 40,000 in the first week alone. General Dwight Eisenhower, the man in charge of the invasion, knew what was coming. He'd been a soldier long enough to read the maps. He called the Sicily landing the most dangerous operation of the war. Because the truth was brutal and simple. You can't surprise an enemy who knows you're coming. And yet, surprise was the only way the invasion could possibly work. The invasion was set for July. That gave the Allies 6 months. 6 months to figure out how to hide an invasion everyone knew was coming. Or watch tens of thousands of men die. The answer, or at least the beginning of one, was sitting in a file cabinet in a basement office in Whitehall, London. It had been sitting there since 1939. Forgotten. Gathering dust. A memo. 28 pages. Written by a young naval intelligence officer with a taste for the theatrical and a mind for the macabre. His name was Ian Fleming. Yes. That Ian Fleming. Before he created James Bond, Fleming was a real spy. Or at least, a real intelligence officer. And in 1939, as war with Germany loomed, his superior, Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, asked him a question. What dirty tricks could we use against the enemy if war breaks out? Fleming loved the question. Because Fleming loved games. Deception. Psychological warfare. He spent weeks compiling ideas. Some brilliant. Some absurd. Some both. And buried in that memo, on page 23, was suggestion number 28. Fleming called it. Not a very nice one. The idea was simple: plant false documents on a corpse, float it to enemy shores, and let the enemy discover it. They'd think the body was a courier who died in a plane crash. They'd think the documents were real. And they'd act on the false information. Fleming thought it was clever. His superiors thought it was insane. The memo was filed. The war began. And for 3 years, no one touched it. Until 1943. When Ewan Montague, desperate for a way to hide the Sicily invasion, started digging through old intelligence proposals. And he found Fleming's suggestion. Number 28. The corpse. The lie. The perfect bait. And he thought, what if we actually did this? What if we turned a dead man into the greatest liar in history? Ian Fleming's idea wasn't original. Not entirely. During World War I, British intelligence had tried something similar. They'd planted false documents on a dead officer near enemy lines. The Germans found the body. Read the documents. And ignored them. They didn't believe it. Fleming knew the World War I attempt had failed because it wasn't believable enough. The story around the corpse didn't hold up under scrutiny. So in his 1939 memo, Fleming added something crucial. The corpse couldn't just be a corpse. It had to be a person. With a name. A rank. A backstory. A life the enemy could verify. You don't just fake the documents. You fake the man. When Ewan Montague read this in early 1943, he saw something Fleming couldn't have predicted in 1939. He saw Sicily. He saw the invasion. He saw tens of thousands of lives hanging in the balance. And he saw a chance to save them. Montague brought the idea to Charles Chumley. Chumley was an odd duck. Eton-educated. RAF intelligence officer. A man who once proposed dropping poisoned cigarettes over Germany and booby-trapping dead rats. In other words, exactly the kind of mind you need for a plan this twisted. February 1943. 5 months until Sicily. Montague and Chumley locked themselves in a room and started building the lie. First question, what documents would the corpse carry? They needed to convince Hitler that the invasion wasn't Sicily. It was somewhere else. Greece. Sardinia. Anywhere but Sicily. So they drafted fake letters, written by real British officers, discussing a fake invasion plan. The letters would mention Operation Husky, but make it sound like Husky was the code name for Greece, not Sicily. And Sicily? Just a diversion. A feint. The letters would be signed by Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff. One of the highest-ranking officers in Britain. The Germans would see that signature and think, this is real. This is top-level intelligence. But Chumley raised a problem. Why would a general's letter be carried by a random courier in a briefcase? That's not protocol. The Germans will smell it. Montague had the answer. The courier isn't a low-level messenger. He's a high-ranking officer himself. A major in the Royal Marines. A man important enough to be hand-delivering sensitive documents from London to Allied headquarters in North Africa. The story: he was flying from Britain to Algeria. His plane went down over the Mediterranean. He drowned. Washed ashore on the Spanish coast. The briefcase still chained to his wrist. Spain finds him. Spain reports it to the British, but first, Spain secretly photographs everything and hands it to the Germans. And the Germans get their hands on the most valuable intelligence of the war. It was elegant. It was simple. It was also insane. Because they weren't just faking documents anymore. They were faking a human being. Every detail of his life had to be real. His wallet. His letters. His habits. His personality. He needed a girlfriend who wrote him love letters. He needed to be a little bit in debt, something believable, human, flawed. He needed hobbies. Recent purchases. Plans he'd never get to fulfill. Montague made a list. Everything this fake man would need to be real. It was pages long. And at the bottom of the list, underlined 3 times. Find a body. Not just any body. The right body. It had to look like he'd drowned. Which meant he needed to have died from something that mimics drowning, like pneumonia. Fluid in the lungs. He needed to be the right age. The right build. Recently deceased, no more than a few days, or decomposition would ruin the illusion. And most importantly, he couldn't have family asking questions. No one could come looking for him. They needed a man no one would miss. In other words, they needed someone society had already forgotten. So they started calling hospitals, morgues, coroners, asking questions no one should have to ask. Weeks passed. No luck. Every body they found had a problem. Wrong cause of death. Wrong age. Or worst of all, family. The invasion was getting closer. Time was running out. And then, in late January 1943, the phone rang. St. Pancras Coroner's Court. They had a body. A man. Mid-30s. Dead from pneumonia after ingesting rat poison. Homeless. No family. No one had claimed him. His name, if it even mattered anymore, was Glyndwr Michael. He was a nobody. A man London had forgotten. And he was about to become the most important man in the war. Glyndwr Michael died on January 24, 1943, in a freezing warehouse near King's Cross Station, London. He was 34 years old. Welsh. Homeless. And utterly alone. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as pneumonia, secondary to ingesting rat poison. Whether it was intentional or accidental, no one knew. No one asked? Glyndwr Michael had no permanent address. No job. No family who came forward. The coroner's file was almost empty. Just a name, a date, and the word unclaimed. In 1943 London, death was everywhere. The Blitz had killed over 40,000 civilians. Thousands more were homeless, displaced, broken. One more homeless man dying in a warehouse wasn't news. It was just Tuesday. When Montague read the report, he saw something no one else did. Pneumonia. Fluid in the lungs. No family. No one asking questions. He was perfect. And that's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Because what does it say about society when a man's greatest value comes after he's dead? When the only time anyone notices you is when they need your corpse? Montague didn't dwell on it. He couldn't. There was a war to win. Lives to save. But years later in his memoir, he'd write about Glyndwr Michael. And you could feel the weight of it. The guilt. On February 4, 1943, Montague went to see the body. He needed to make sure the body would work. That it could pass for a drowned Royal Marine officer. The body was in reasonable condition. The cold had preserved it. Mid-30s. Average build. No obvious signs of foul play or disease that would raise suspicion. The medical examiner confirmed, pneumonia-related fluid in the lungs would be indistinguishable from drowning to a casual post-mortem. Montague approved the body. There were legal hoops to jump through. Technically, you can't just steal a corpse, even an unclaimed one. Montague went to Bentley Purchase, the coroner, and made an unusual request. He couldn't tell Purchase the full plan, it was too secret. But he needed permission. Purchase, a patriot and no fool, read between the lines. He didn't ask questions. He just signed the papers. The official cause of death would remain vague. Pneumonia. No mention of rat poison. No details that might surface later. The body was moved to a secret refrigeration facility. It had to be kept cold, preserved, until the right moment. For 2 months, Glyndwr Michael's body waited in cold storage while Montague and Chumley built his new life. Because now came the hardest part. Turning a homeless Welsh man into a Royal Marines officer. They gave him a name. Major William Martin. Acting rank. Royal Marines. Serial number 148228. They created a service record. Promotions. Transfers. A career that looked real because it was buried in real military bureaucracy. They found a photograph. A man who looked right. Generic enough. Could be anyone. They attached it to his ID. Sealed it. Official. It looked real because it was real. Except for the man in it. Then came the personal touches. The things that make a man. Love letters from his fiancée. Her name, Pam. Jean Leslie, a clerk in MI5, volunteered to write them. She poured her heart into them. Made them real. Longing. Affection. Plans for a future that would never come. They put her photo in his wallet. On the back, he'd written, "My Pam." They gave him debt. An angry letter from his bank manager about an overdraft. A receipt for an engagement ring. £53. Expensive. He was planning to propose. Ticket stubs from a West End show. A nightclub receipt. Signs of a man who enjoyed life. Keys to an apartment he never lived in. A cigarette case, engraved. A gift, perhaps. They laid it all out. A life in objects. And it was convincing. Too convincing. Chumley later admitted it felt wrong. Like they were grave robbing a man who was still alive. But there was no time for guilt. April was here. The invasion was 10 weeks away. The uniform was ready. The documents were ready. The man, or what was left of him, was ready. One briefcase, chained to a dead man's wrist. One beach in Spain where the currents would carry the body ashore. And one enemy who had no idea what was coming. It was time to put a dead man to work. Time to see if a forgotten man could fool the most powerful dictator in the world. April 17, 1943. 3 a.m. A secret facility in London. The body of Glyndwr Michael, frozen for 2.5 months, was removed from storage. Montague, Chumley, and a trusted pathologist gathered in a secure room. No one spoke. What they were about to do was, by any measure, grotesque. They dressed the body in Major William Martin's uniform. Slowly. Carefully. The insignia. The rank badges. The boots, polished to regulation standards. They filled his pockets with his life. The wallet. The keys. The cigarette case. The receipt for the engagement ring, tucked into his jacket pocket. Fresh. Recent. 2 love letters from Pam. Slightly worn, like he'd read them many times. Inside the briefcase, the fake invasion plans. Letters from General Nye. Documents marked top secret. They chained the briefcase to his wrist. If the body was found, the briefcase had to be with it. Inseparable. When they were done, it wasn't Glyndwr Michael anymore. It was Major William Martin, a Royal Marines officer who died in the service of his country. The pathologist gave his assessment. If examined, the body would pass. The pneumonia would look like drowning. The time of death would seem consistent with a plane crash at sea. Montague allowed himself one moment of doubt. What if this doesn't work? What if the Germans don't believe it? What if they see through it? Then he pushed it down. There was no alternative. The body was placed into a special canister. 6 feet long. Airtight. Marked. Optical instruments. Packed with dry ice to keep it frozen during transport. Sealed. Locked. Ready. At 4 a.m., the canister was loaded into an unmarked truck. 2 men would make the drive. Montague. And St. John Horsfall, a race car champion turned MI5 driver. The destination, Holy Loch, Scotland. 460 miles north. Where a submarine was waiting. They drove through blackout London. No headlights. Navigating by moonlight and memory. North through the English countryside. Through small villages where people were just waking. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? In the back, the body of Glyndwr Michael, now Major William Martin, rode in frozen silence toward the sea. They arrived at Holy Loch on April 19th, evening. The submarine was waiting. HMS Seraph. A British T-class submarine. One of the most advanced in the fleet. Her commander, Lieutenant Norman Bill Jewell. 29 years old. Experienced. Trustworthy. Montague briefed Jewell. But not fully. Jewell was told he was transporting a special package on a top-secret mission. Jewell didn't ask what was in the canister. He'd learned not to ask questions in this war. The crew was told they were carrying meteorological equipment for a weather station. They joked about it. Must be one hell of a thermometer. The canister was secured in the submarine. No different from any other cargo. Montague stayed on shore. He'd done his part. Now it was up to Jewell. And the sea. And luck. On April 19th, at 6 p.m., HMS Seraph slipped out of Holy Loch and disappeared beneath the North Atlantic. Destination, the coast of Spain. 2,000 miles south. For 10 days, Seraph traveled submerged during daylight, surfacing only at night to recharge batteries and ventilate. Inside, the crew went about their duties. Silent. Professional. The canister sat in the corner, growing warmer as the dry ice evaporated. Days passed. Scotland. The Irish Sea. The Bay of Biscay. Past German-occupied France. Twice they detected German patrol boats. Twice, they dove deeper and waited. Luck held. On April 28, Seraph passed through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. Jewel studied his charts. The drop point was specific. Off the coast of Huelva, Spain. The tides had to be right. The currents had to carry the body ashore, not out to sea. Jewel calculated, April 30th. Before dawn. 4:30 a.m. On the night of April 29th, the crew prepared. Jewel finally opened the canister. The crew reacted exactly as you'd expect. Horror. Confusion. Jewel explained nothing. Just gave orders. This was the mission. Do your duty. They obeyed. Because that's what soldiers do. At 4:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943, the body of Glyndwr Michael was brought onto the deck of HMS Seraph. 1 mile off the coast of Spain. The lights of Huelva barely visible through the pre-dawn mist. Jewel looked at the body. At the briefcase chained to its wrist. Major William Martin. A man who never existed. About to change history. Jewel read a brief prayer. The crew bowed their heads. Then they lifted the body to the edge. For a moment, no one moved. Jewel nodded. And they let him go. The body floated. Face down. The briefcase chained to his wrist. The tide began to pull it toward shore. Exactly as planned? Jewel and his crew watched until the body disappeared into the darkness. Then Seraph dove. And vanished. Leaving Major William Martin alone in the water. Dawn broke over Spain. And somewhere in the currents, a dead man was about to deliver the greatest lie of the war. April 30th, 1943. 9:30 a.m. A beach near Punta Umbria, just north of Huelva, Spain. A local fisherman named Jose Antonio Rey Maria was checking his nets. He saw something floating in the surf. A body. Face down. A briefcase chained to its wrist. Rey Maria waded in and pulled the body ashore. A British officer. Royal Marines uniform. The insignia still visible despite the water. And the briefcase. Still chained. Still locked. Rey Maria didn't touch the briefcase. He ran to get the authorities. Within an hour, the Spanish Civil Guard arrived. Then local military officials. Then naval officers. They found his identification. Major William Martin. Royal Marines. Serial number 148228. They found his wallet. The photograph of his fiancée. The receipts. The theater tickets. They found the love letters. Read them. Felt the tragedy of a man who'd never see his girl again. But the briefcase. That was the problem. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Spain in 1943 was officially neutral. But Francisco Franco, Spain's dictator, was sympathetic to Hitler. He owed the Nazis. They'd helped him win the Spanish Civil War. German intelligence, the Abwehr, operated freely in Spain. Spies everywhere. Especially in coastal towns like Huelva. The Spanish officials knew exactly what they had. A dead British officer. Secret documents. And they did exactly what the British expected. They called the British embassy in Madrid to report the body. And then they called the Germans. Before the British could arrive, German agents in Huelva photographed everything in the briefcase. Every page. Every letter. Every detail. The invasion plans. General Nye's letter discussing Operation Husky, but framing it as an attack on Greece, not Sicily. Another letter mentioning Sardinia as a backup target. Sicily dismissed as too obvious, just a feint to distract from the real targets. The photographs were sealed and sent to Berlin. Immediately. Top priority. Then, and this is crucial, the Spanish put everything back. Exactly as they found it. Relocked the briefcase. Rechained it. Made it look like nothing had been disturbed. 2 days later, on May 2nd, the British naval attaché from Madrid arrived. He examined the body. Confirmed the identity. Major William Martin. He asked for the briefcase. The Spanish said it was locked. They didn't have the key. It took days of diplomatic pressure before the Spanish finally handed over the briefcase. When they did, it was sealed. Looked untouched. The British rushed it to London for forensic examination. They checked everything. Locks. Seals. The documents themselves. The conclusion, possibly tampered with. But no definitive proof. Montague read the report. Possibly tampered with. That meant the Germans might have the documents. Or they might not. It was early May. The Sicily invasion was scheduled for July 10th, 10 weeks away. Churchill and the war planners waited. They couldn't change the invasion plans without knowing if mincemeat had worked. Montague waited. British intelligence monitored every German communication they could intercept, looking for any sign, any hint, any mention of troop movements. Days passed. Nothing. Then May 8th, May 9th. Then, on May 11th, British codebreakers intercepted something. A German intelligence report. From Spain. To Berlin. Documents recovered from British courier. Authenticity verified. Contents suggest Allied invasion targets, Greece and Sardinia. Sicily appears to be diversion only. Montague read it. Read it again. Authenticity verified. They believed it. The Germans believed it. But that wasn't enough. They needed confirmation from higher up. May 12th. Another intercept. This one from OKW, the German High Command. Orders to redirect reinforcements. Panzer divisions from Sicily. To Greece. The Germans were moving troops. Away from Sicily. They were weakening Sicily's defenses. Montague rushed the intercepts to Churchill. Churchill read them. And smiled. He sent a telegram to the operations commanders. Mincemeat swallowed rod, line and sinker. It had worked. Against all odds. Against all reason. A homeless man who died from rat poison had just fooled Adolf Hitler. And Hitler, the most powerful dictator in Europe, was moving his armies based on a lie told by a corpse. But the war wasn't over. The deception was working. Now came the hard part. The actual invasion. Where thousands of young men would storm the beaches of Sicily. And find out if a dead man's lie had saved their lives. The Wolfschanz, the Wolf's Lair. Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. May 12, 1943. Hitler called a strategy meeting. His top commanders were there. Admiral Canaris, head of the Abwehr. Field Marshal Keitel. General Jodl. The intelligence from Spain had been analyzed. Verified. Cross-checked. The documents from Major Martin had been deemed authentic by German intelligence. Canaris presented the findings. The British were planning invasions of Greece and Sardinia. Sicily was mentioned, but only as a diversion. A feint. Hitler listened. Some of his generals were skeptical. Sicily was the obvious target. Too obvious to ignore. Field Marshal Kesselring, commanding in Italy, insisted Sicily needed more troops. The Allies will come there. I'm certain of it. Hitler cut him off. No, Hitler said. Sicily is too obvious. The English want us to think it's Sicily. The real target is Greece. And Sardinia. Hitler's diary entry that night. The Führer does not agree with the Duce that the most likely invasion point is Sicily. He believes the discovered Anglo-Saxon order confirms the assumption that the planned attack will be directed mainly against Sardinia and the Peloponnesus. And with that, Hitler restructured the entire German defense of the Mediterranean. Orders went out immediately. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's best commander, was pulled from Italy and sent to Greece to prepare defenses. Panzer divisions were redirected from Sicily to Greece. Infantry reinforcements flooded into the Balkans. Naval patrols intensified around Greek islands. U-boats repositioned. Luftwaffe squadrons moved from Sicily to Athens. By mid-June, German defensive strength in Greece had doubled. In Sicily, defensive forces remained largely unchanged. Undermanned. Under-equipped. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park read the German communications in real time. Every intercepted message confirmed it. The Germans had swallowed the lie completely. Sicily is a feint. Führer insists primary defense focus, Greece and Sardinia. Allied intelligence could barely believe their luck. Montague read every intercept. Each one was another life saved. Every tank sent to Greece was one less tank waiting in Sicily. Allied planners revised their casualty estimates downward. Eisenhower read the reports and authorized the invasion to proceed as planned. Churchill, for the first time in weeks, allowed himself a moment of optimism. But there was a problem. Kesselring never stopped arguing for Sicily's defense. He sent message after message. Sicily is the target. I'm certain. We need more forces. Hitler ignored him. Kesselring did what he could with what he had. But most of Sicily's garrison was Italian. And by 1943, Italian morale was collapsing. Italy had lost North Africa. Lost battles in Russia. The war was going badly. Mussolini's grip on power was weakening. Allied intelligence predicted many Italian units would surrender quickly, which meant the real fight would be against the Germans. And thanks to Operation Mincemeat, there were far fewer Germans in Sicily than there should have been. The weeks passed. German forces continued flowing to Greece. In North Africa, the Allied invasion force assembled. 160,000 troops. 3,000 ships. 4,000 aircraft. Young men who had no idea a dead man had tilted the odds in their favor. General Bernard Montgomery commanded the British 8th Army. General George Patton commanded the U.S. 7th Army. Both knew the plan. Both knew the risks. But neither knew about Operation Mincemeat. They didn't know that the defenses they'd face had been deliberately weakened by a lie. They just knew they were about to hit the beach. And find out if they'd live or die. July 9, 1943. The invasion fleet sailed from North Africa. The largest amphibious assault in history to that point. Destination, Sicily. The beaches where Glyndwr Michael's lie would finally be tested. Where the dead would meet the living. And history would decide if a corpse could save an army. July 10, 1943. 2:45 a.m. 3,000 ships. 160,000 men. The largest amphibious invasion in history. They came in darkness. Many were seasick. Most were terrified. They'd been told to expect hell. Intelligence briefings had warned of heavy German fortifications. Minefields. Artillery emplacements. Panzer divisions waiting on the beaches. They expected another Dieppe. Another bloodbath. At 2:45 a.m., the first wave hit the beaches. Soldiers stormed ashore expecting withering fire. And found almost nothing. Sporadic gunfire. A few Italian positions. But nothing like what they'd been told to expect. Italian troops surrendered in droves. Thousands of them. Walking out of their bunkers with white flags. By the end of the first day, 80,000 Allied troops were ashore. Allied commanders were stunned. The invasion was ahead of schedule. Patton's forces raced inland. Meeting resistance, yes. But not the wall of steel they'd feared. Montgomery's 8th Army pushed north along the east coast. The Germans, when they did fight, fought hard. German panzer divisions counterattacked. Luftwaffe bombed Allied positions. SS units fought with fanatic determination. The battle for Sicily was brutal. House-to-house fighting in ancient towns. Snipers. Artillery barrages. Men still died. But they kept advancing. Because here's what the Germans in Sicily realized too late. They didn't have enough forces to hold the island. Kesselring, the man who'd warned Hitler about Sicily, now faced the consequences of being ignored. He requested emergency reinforcements. They came. But too late. Too slowly. By early August, the Germans were evacuating. Allied forces captured city after city. Palermo. Catania. On August 17, 1943, just 38 days after the invasion began, Sicily fell. The entire island. Conquered in 5 weeks. Allied casualties, approximately 23,000. Killed, wounded, or missing. each one a tragedy. A life cut short. But pre-invasion estimates, before mincemeat, had predicted 40,000 casualties in the first week alone. Operation Mincemeat likely saved between 10,000 and 20,000 Allied lives. 10 to 20,000 men who walked off that island instead of being buried in it. Montagu understood the numbers. He never spoke about it publicly. But those who knew him said he carried those lives with him for the rest of his days. Axis casualties, 165,000. Most of them captured. The Italian army in Sicily had collapsed. And on July 25, just 15 days into the Sicily invasion, Benito Mussolini was overthrown. Arrested by his own government. Italy was collapsing. On September 8, Italy officially surrendered. The Allies invaded mainland Italy. The soft underbelly strategy was working. Hitler was forced to divert resources from the Eastern Front to defend Italy, which meant fewer Germans fighting the Soviets. And it gave the Allies invaluable experience for D-Day a year later. Eisenhower learned from Sicily. What worked? What didn't? Sicily proved that amphibious invasions against Fortress Europe could succeed. The road to Berlin ran through Sicily. And it all started with a corpse. A briefcase full of lies. And a dictator who believed them. Every soldier who walked off that beach owed his life to a lot of things. Bravery. Strategy. Firepower. Luck. But some of them, maybe 10,000, maybe 20,000, owed their lives to a man named Glyndwr Michael. A man who died with nothing. And became everything. They never knew his name. Never thanked him. He was buried under a false name in a Spanish cemetery. But his lie saved thousands. And that's worth remembering. When the war ended in 1945, Operation Mincemeat was still a secret. The British government classified everything. The documents. The photographs. The identities. Montagu and Chumley returned to civilian life. They told no one. Years passed. The story stayed buried. Until 1953. When Ewan Montagu published a book. The Man Who Never Was. It became an instant bestseller. In 1956, it became a movie. The story of the corpse that fooled Hitler captivated the world. But Montagu left one crucial detail out. The identity of the corpse. In the book, Montagu wrote only this. A young man who had died from pneumonia. I will not give his name. He has a grave, which is tended. That is enough. For decades, Montagu refused to reveal the man's real identity. Journalists tried to find out. Researchers combed through records. Nothing. The grave in Spain still bore the false name. Major William Martin. British veterans visiting Spain would leave flowers, honoring a man who never existed. The question haunted historians. Then in 1996, a researcher finally found the answer. Roger Morgan, digging through old coroner's records in London, found a file from St. Pancras Coroner's Court. January 1943. A name. Glyndwr Michael. Age 34. Welsh. Homeless. Died from pneumonia after ingesting rat poison. No family. No one claimed the body. The revelation made headlines. After 53 years, the world finally knew. There was only one photograph of Glyndwr Michael. Maybe. Even that's uncertain. Records of his life were sparse. Born in Aberbargod, Wales. Worked as a laborer. Struggled. Fell through the cracks. Wales in the 1930s was brutal. Coal mines closing. Unemployment crushing. Poverty everywhere. By the early 1940s, Glyndwr was homeless in London. Living in warehouses. Forgotten. On January 24, 1943, he was found dead in a King's Cross warehouse. Rat poison in his system. The coroner marked his file. Unclaimed. No funeral. No mourners. No one who remembered his name. Until 2 weeks later, when Montagu called looking for a body. And Glyndwr Michael, who had been nothing, owned nothing, meant nothing to anyone, became the most important person in the war. His death influenced Hitler, redirected armies, saved thousands of lives. Men lived because he died. In 1998, the British government finally added a new plaque to his grave in Spain. It reads, Glyndwr Michael. Served as Major William Martin, Royal Marines. The grave is still maintained. Veterans still visit. Still leave flowers. But even now, there's controversy. Some researchers doubt it was Glyndwr Michael. They propose other candidates. Other bodies. There's talk of DNA testing. Exhuming the body. Confirming once and for all. Montagu took his secrets to the grave. He died in 1985, still refusing to reveal everything. Why did he protect the identity so fiercely? Maybe he feared family might surface. Demand answers. Create complications. Or maybe, more likely, it was guilt. They'd stolen a man's identity. Used his body as a weapon. Buried him under a false name. Maybe Montagu knew that what they'd done, necessary as it was also a violation. They'd turned a human being into an object. A tool. But 10,000 men went home to their families. Thousands of children were born who otherwise never would have existed. If you trace the family trees, there might be hundreds of thousands of people alive today because of what Glyndwr Michael's body did in 1943. So was it worth it? There's no good answer to that question. What we know is this. Glyndwr Michael existed. He lived. He suffered. He died alone. And in death he mattered more than he ever did in life. Whether that's beautiful or horrifying depends on how you look at it. He has two names now. Two identities. One that saved thousands. And one that society forgot. And maybe that's fitting. Because Operation Mincemeat was always about contradictions. Truth and lies. Life and death. Power and powerlessness. All tangled together in a way that makes you question what any of those words even mean. Today, if you visit Huelva, Spain, you can find the grave. People still come. Still leave flowers. Still honor the man, or men buried there. Glyndwr Michael. William Martin. Most don't know the full story. They just know it's remarkable. But when you stand there, you can see Sicily across the Mediterranean. The beaches where 160,000 men once stormed ashore. Where men bled and died and fought. And where some of them, maybe thousands, survived because of a lie. Operation Mincemeat didn't win the war. Not alone. But it was a domino. A crucial one. Without Sicily, no invasion of Italy. Without Italy's lessons, maybe no D-Day. Or a different D-Day. A bloodier one. World War II killed between 70 and 85 million people. 10,000 lives saved is a rounding error in that number. But tell that to those 10,000 men. Or their wives. Their children. Their grandchildren. There are people alive right now, reading this, listening to this, who exist because their grandfather walked off a beach in Sicily instead of dying on it. And they have no idea they owe their existence to a homeless Welsh man who ate rat poison in a London warehouse. That's the real legacy of Operation Mincemeat. Not the battles. Not the statistics. But the invisible threads that connect a forgotten death to countless lives. Remember how this story started. A man dying alone. Powerless. Invisible. A man society decided didn't matter. And then he became the most powerful weapon of World War II. More powerful than any general. Any spy. Any weapon. Because he did something impossible. He told a lie that couldn't be broken. Because he couldn't be interrogated. Couldn't be tortured. Couldn't betray the secret. The perfect spy is a dead one. But here's the question that haunts this story. What does it say about the world that Glyndwr Michael only mattered after he died? That a man had to become a corpse to become valuable? We live in a world that measures human worth by utility. Glyndwr Michael had no utility to Britain while he was alive. Homeless. Poor. Struggling. But dead? He was priceless. Is that inspiring? Or is it damning? Maybe it's both. We celebrate heroes. We build monuments to them. We remember their names. But the invisible people, the ones dying in warehouses, sleeping in doorways, eating rat poison because life is unbearable. We don't see them. Until we need them. And that's the tragedy wrapped inside the triumph. Glyndwr Michael got in death what he never got in life. Purpose. Identity. Honor. But he was dead. Would he have chosen this if he could? We'll never know. Because no one asked? The decision was made for him. By powerful men in positions of authority. How many Glyndwr Michaels are out there right now? Invisible. Forgotten. Waiting to matter. What could they become if someone saw them before they died? That's the question this story forces you to face. Not about war. Not about spies. But about who we see. Who we value. Who we remember. Glyndwr Michael saved thousands. And we didn't even know his name for 53 years. Now we do. Glyndwr Michael. Say his name. Because he mattered. Even when no one thought he did. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real lesson. That the invisible deserve to be seen. Not after they die. While they live. Because everyone has the power to change history. Even the ones we walk past every day.